will now be recorded.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our next Ask the Expert webinar by SMPTE Hollywood. My name is Kylie, and I'm a section manager for the Hollywood section. And like I said in the first session, given the state of things in the world and our industry, we thought a series providing you with access to different kinds of working professionals in LA would be a great way to continue learning and meeting people while you might not be able to otherwise. We conceived of this when the pandemic was getting started to try to reconnect people. And now we have been shifting the conversation, thankfully, toward
Welcome one. We will certainly have a promo code we will share at the end.
Please stay muted when you come into the meeting. Thankfully, we've shifted the conversation to discuss how racism impacts our society. And there have been conversations throughout the world about that, especially in the United States. And a lot of us have been having conversations that we've been seeing for a while. And one way individuals can impact representation in our industry is just by providing access to each other to make sure that education is free and accessible to each other, and jobs you didn't know about are on your radar. Representation in our industry is sorely lacking, and one way we can combat that is by things like this, just opening the door and welcoming people in, and finding a way for emerging professionals to meet established pros. So if you're still in school, just graduated, thinking about changing tracks within entertainment, or a career change in general, you might be surprised to learn about a lot of the roles that exist in Hollywood and that are within the SMPTE community. It can be inspirational, or it can be practically useful to hear about someone's personal path. So everybody gets where they're going very differently, but finding touch points can be very comforting. So a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. Everyone on this call is muted. And I will continue to mute you if you are not. And if you have a question for Kathryn, you'll click on the speech bubble in the upper right corner, type it into the chat. Make sure it says send to everyone so that I do see it. And I'll select some questions and get to as many as possible. And at the top, if you click on view active cameras, it should give you a little bit better experience because the only people on camera are me and Kathryn today. So let's get started with our first guest, Kathryn Brillhart. Kathryn is a cinematographer, VFX producer, and virtual production expert. I'm going to hand the reins of this over to her for a few minutes now to give her backstory, and then we'll move into the Q&A. So welcome, Kathryn. Thanks so much. Oh, you're muted. Sorry, I muted you.
Sorry. I just wanted to say hi for having me.
Everyone. It's pretty. But it's something that.
Sorry, there's something. Okay. So a little bit about where I started. I'm from Columbia, Maryland, actually, and I grew up kind of knowing that I was going to be a cinematographer. I think 11 was about the time I knew my dad is a cinematographer, and so I did have access to digital cameras and was sort of in this world of broadcast meets documentary kind of growing up. I ended up going to film school in New York at Ithaca College, where I studied cinematography and directing and fine art. And I went there originally so that I could, at the time, you know, film was like what you wanted to use. So we got to use Bolexes and Aton LTRs and learn film and kind of the history of digital as it was kind of being born at that time. So college. Then I decided, just kind of based on where my interests were, that Los Angeles was the city that I wanted to move to pursue cinematography. And I just did. I was, I guess, at that time, like Craigslist was one of the first places where you could just find jobs and start meeting people and networking and kind of getting in there, or just word of mouth, or going to, you know, honorary society events and asking people if they needed a PA. So I kind of just dove in and did that. Had to work a ton of part-time jobs to be able to do that. And from there, like as jobs started slowly kind of happening and like meeting people and getting on different sets, you know, those opportunities expand and create other opportunities for you. And I ended up working with a crew that had some visual effects shots, and they were shooting plates for CG dinosaurs. And I ended up getting totally absorbed into this world of visual effects and started realizing in a hands-on way how it just goes hand in hand with cinematography and this one career path that I was trying to pursue. So that turned into another 10-year plus exploration of visual effects and working in visual effects and cinematography. And I've always been a technical person in the sense that I'm like hands-on, I like to problem solve and like build camera rigs and learn about new technologies, apply those to projects and kind of think outside the box. And I realized that that also played into visual effects supervision. And then it started also playing into visual effects producing, because you can't really pursue those career paths without having one foot in the technical and one foot in management. So it's kind of been an interesting zigzag path. And to be quite honest, I identify as a cinematographer, but I am multi-passionate. So I will just continually pursue likely cinematography, visual effects supervision, virtual production, where those two worlds blend, and producing. So I feel like that's a good summary of how I got to where I am.
Great. Yeah, that's a super interesting path, because I guess when both of us got started in the industry, which wasn't that long ago, virtual production was not really a thing. And now it's becoming sort of inherent to what production is. How is virtual production different from traditional production, or what we used to do, for anyone on the call that might not be as familiar with the whole process?
Yeah, well, you know, honestly, I'd say it's an evolution, because if you really look back, starting around 2001, and in some ways earlier, visualization and the techniques that, you know, people like the founders of the visualization companies that we know now, they worked directly with George Lucas and Spielberg and James Cameron, visualizing using technology that united the physical and digital worlds then, so that they could create camera moves in like Moulin Rouge, or I would even say like early Star Wars and Tintin and Avatar, and some of these films that were coming out in the early 2000s. Visualization companies were kind of leading what virtual production was kind of turning into. At the same time, in the early 2000s, between like 2004 and now, there's been the revolution of optical to digital cinematography. And I would argue that that is unifying the digital and physical worlds of filmmaking and bringing, like, ultimately visual effects into the beginning of a pipeline from early on. And what we're seeing in the last 10 years is this game engine technology that Spielberg was also investing in the early 2000s as a new tool that can help us in real time bring visual effects into the pre-production and production at the same time. So it's very layered, and it's actually been happening for 20 years. So it's not really a new thing. It's just suddenly sort of accessible. It's another tipping point. So like when the Red camera was available to the public in 2008, 2009, that was a tipping point where you started seeing this open break, this democratization in digital tools. And you could argue that, like, you know, lighting has done the same thing. Like, you know, you can gel a light by turning a switch. Like everyone's kind of working together to have real-time digital options on set. So
Yeah, it's amazing to see how cinematography and VFX used to be sort of like the separate thing, and there was collaborations and previs, but now it's sort of just everything. There is no post. It's all at the beginning and throughout. It's intertwined. And that goes into a question in the chat. Do you think working in these two different fields, like you do with cinematography and VFX, is a requirement for people working in film and TV today?
I think it should be, because whether you're working on an independent project, like a drama versus an action film, what it really does is expands your tool set and gives you a wider variety of problem-solving tools to bring to the table. So like when you're interviewing with a director and either helping put together a lookbook, or you have a chance to do that on your own, or if somebody pitches you a lookbook, then you just have a greater variety of tools and techniques and processes to say like, well, these are the 3 ways we can do it. And these are the different price points. You know, let's try to work toward your vision and make sure that that's the priority. But I can already see what negotiations we'll have to make along the way if we go down these paths. And I think having those kinds of solutions really help a director, because they're hiring you to help solve problems. So that would be my advice.
Mm-hmm. And a point of clarity, someone asked in the chat, when you say game engines, do you mean such as Unity? And we need Unity, Unreal,
Yep.
things like that. Do you find those are accessible to newcomers?
I do actually. It's been incredible how they've kind of come onto the market and have just always offered their education, training, and curriculum for free. So, and you can even download the engines for free, especially Unreal Engine. And then the progress that I've seen in the last like 7 years has just been other software companies like starting to integrate their packages into Unreal. So there's still limitations, but if you want to learn it and get in there, like you could even join all these different Facebook groups with like high-level professionals. Like I think I'm gonna watch the name, but it's the real-time VFX group in Facebook. That's a great one. You know, you can there's so many. What I like about the game engines too is they're connected to open source, and I think that's part of the key. Like that community is all about sharing knowledge and growing together as a community. So it's kind of perfect for this COVID time, really. If you wanted to learn something new, you could just do it.
Absolutely. And it feels like this evolved part of production is really a place where people that are up and coming and even are not even in the industry yet can really come in and make their mark and do a lot of work on their own, a lot of learning on their own. Do you think this is maybe a door that's more open than others? Or is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's sort of this, it's an interesting rush because there's the visual effects community that's seeing value in these skill sets, and businesses starting to implement these pipelines into their company infrastructure. So if you're somebody building a skill set and you can come in and say, oh, I've got experience blueprinting and this is the project that I did on my own to solve this and this problem. That's something that visual effects companies would be looking for, or visualization companies would be looking for. It's kind of this really cool time where you would know as much maybe as somebody who has experience with visual effects. I mean, because, and this is why like I would say even an older generation than me would say it's like the 1998 of visual effects again. There's just this new game engine tool set creates realism to a certain point, and there are limitations today in hardware, software, you know, et cetera. But according to Murphy's Law, like, as that stuff progresses, you're just going to see a whole new type of artwork and filmmaking and game making and level of production coming out of this. It's just a totally different way of constructing projects. And you know, you could even argue that it's sort of like that transition from linear editing to non-linear editing. You know, you would have had to approach linear editing in a totally different way, whereas like non-linear editing sort of centralized that process, and you could do all these different things to your footage at once, and it was non-destructive. And, you know, you were using time code to kind of chop stuff up. And with Unreal, like an Unreal Engine or Unity or these game engines, they already have multi-user capabilities. So using the cloud, you can all be working on the same project. It's like Google Docs for filmmaking, but you're all in the world. You're all placing cameras. You're all, you know, somebody's working on modeling and locking and placing the set while somebody's framing the cameras. And I think how we work together is going to be defined by who's working in that space right now. So if you are learning those skills and like even getting in on the ground floor with some of the companies that are just starting to implement those things, like you could be a thought leader in the next 5 years.
That's an exciting opportunity to think about. Stuff changes so fast in 5 years. And an interesting question that kind of comes from that, what is your opinion on the best way to present these self-learned experiences to companies when you're trying to get your foot in the door?
A couple different ways. I mean, I think so traditionally people kind of have a show reel that makes it easy in an interview to sort of scrub through like a Vimeo link that shows, but it kind of depends what type of art you're demonstrating. But like for a modeler, let's say, or somebody who wants to be part of a virtual art department, if you have a show reel showing your finished work in context of a shot or a scene or a rendered clip, that lets a producer and supervisor know the final quality level that you were able to reach within the context of the creative. And then having like an ArtStation profile that just, it's almost, and I don't know if you don't know what ArtStation is, it's almost like this cool artist space where in like a Tumblr, Instagram sort of way, you can put really high quality versions, like still images of your work, your concept, like your lookbooks, drawing sketches, models. That's a really cool resource. And to an interview, I would just bring your resume, like a written resume, like your shots in context to final, and then maybe concepts that you work on in your free time.
Awesome. It sounds like with this, you can really demonstrate a lot just with clips and a show reel, a website, because it kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah.
And another question from the chat, this does evolve so fast. How do you keep yourself updated with all this new technology and new workflows?
It's a good question. Well, at this point, I try to keep my ear to the ground in my professional network with what groups of people are doing projects that revolve around like academic white papers or problem solving. I definitely take creative projects that are separate from this kind of part of my career, but I'm always looking to constantly be associated with technical problem solving challenges. So it's different than a creative project in which somebody says, hey, I've got this creative script, and you find the problems by looking at the creative and going, how can we make this vision come to life? There are case study projects that I like to be part of where we attach a script to it so that we have real life creative challenges to figure out and solve. But then we have a list of like questions that would get us to writing a white paper, solving something that maybe on a higher level we're making other industry level connections about. Like, you know, one interesting challenge right now would be like validating a path for real-time game engines to display on in-display, different types of wall setups. So, you know, I would even say you might even have more leverage getting into companies if you're able to do case study projects with your own personal stuff, with your friends. Like if you banded together with people who had different skill sets and did your own case study, that would be really interesting. And it would maybe even set you apart from somebody who's only working on creative projects.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a big part of this that where documentation and being able to explain what you're doing is super important. Like in SMPTE, we have our motion imaging journal and conference, and I know you're active with VES, the Visual Effects Society, and also open source standards and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about where people can find these sorts of case studies, like, or how they get involved with these societies?
Yeah, definitely. ASC is a little harder to crack into, just with just how they are, but it's possible to crack in through volunteering and meeting the right people, or through working with SMPTE and other organizations that would pull you in, if that's your interest. SMPTE seems like very simple to get involved with. You know, you could join a volunteer program and just do mentorship programs and get pulled in. VES is similar, like, you know, you could reach out to the office staff or a member that you know and say, how can I get involved? I want to be part of these conversations, and we pull you right in. HPA has great programs as well, and PGA has some young producing mentorship programs.
Mm-hmm. And the ASC being the
yeah,
American Society of Cinematographers, for anyone that doesn't know.
Yeah.
And if you're in LA, they do have open houses occasionally. I mean, when we're not in a pandemic. So if you're interested in this space in cinematography, or the intersection of VFX and cinematography, definitely keep an eye on that, because that is super interesting. And another question about sort of learning and building on all these skills from a high school teacher. Can you elaborate a little bit about the difference between animation and compositing, and what software you'd recommend students and new professionals really focus on?
Yeah, sure. Animation is, it's different than compositing because it's so funny. I wasn't expecting that one. I would just say to differentiate by software packages first. Maybe an artist working in animation would probably use Maya. And you can use Maya to build your asset, rig your asset, and then animate your asset and set a camera so that you can animate the camera and the character using that software. And then for compositing, Nuke, Fusion, those would be the software packages that I would use. And then, so, you know, typically you would take an animated asset that's also had gone through like a lighting pass and has shadows and lighting applied to it, and all these elements. Animation is just what I would see as like an element that goes into a compositing step, is integrated into the scene. So compositing is basically just integrating all these elements that you have from every department, including the plate. Everything's integrated into the plate so that you get the final shot, basically. And then compositing is changing and evolving right now because, you know, you have deep rendering that's happening in compositing, which means that sometimes you can actually tweak lighting after compositing and rendering, which is sort of changing the game a little bit. You would I think, historically, compositing for animated features versus live action features has traditionally been different. But what I'm hearing from compositors these days is that it's actually quite similar now, the techniques that they're using. So it's impacted how we've separated our categories for the visual effects awards, actually.
Interesting. And a lot of those software packages like Nuke and Maya also have education versions, right?
Yeah.
That I think are fairly open.
Yeah, they should. And I believe through these, like the COVID times, all of these companies are trying to offer curriculum and training.
Mm-hmm.
So there should be even more availability for this right now.
Mm-hmm. So in your work, what has been the most challenging part of your career so far, either project or situation? And how did you get through it?
It's so funny because I feel like my most challenging moment is always the present, because I'm always pursuing something that is like the biggest challenge ever. So I feel like it's always the now that's the most challenging. But maybe a past challenge. I had the opportunity to work on a fully improvised feature film a couple of years ago, and that was probably one of the most left field challenges I've had as a DP recently, which is why I loved doing the project, because the director said, hey, what if we are a troupe of improvisers that specializes in doing 90-minute dramatic improvised narrative. We'd like to turn that concept into a feature film. How do we do that? And preparing for that shooting scenario with that team was very challenging. We ended up building, through our rehearsal process with the actors, a language and strategy for how camera would spontaneously be blocked with action that we would have no idea what it was going to be except for in the moment. So that was a very interesting process. And then when it came to executing on set, within the budget that we had, how do we build a camera system that allows myself and the other operator to see what we're doing on our monitoring system, and then how do we globally light the set without interrupting the action of the plot? Because in some cases, we had an entire house that we were working in. We had to globally light the set for the day. And the actors, having never seen the set, not really knowing who their characters were, discovering that in the moment, and then developing plot, kind of had to find the lighting that we put in the room for them. So that was a very challenging one, but it had really cool results.
That sounds like quite a puzzle. And it's interesting, it sounds like it was hugely collaborative, which I think people maybe underestimate, especially if they come into the industry through post-production where they're used to working kind of solo. There's so much working with other people. How important has that been to you? And is that a skill that you had to learn, or did that just come natural to you?
I think there are parts of it that come naturally to me, but I think there are certainly like other soft skills that I've had to learn along the way, yeah, like it's interesting. Like I just think that sorry, I lost my train of thought. I went down a rabbit hole.
All good. you said soft skills, and I was going to ask, what, aside from hard skills like actual knowing programming languages or Maya or whatever, what, when you're looking at hiring entry-level people, what soft skills are really important for hiring or recommending them?
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's kind of where my mind is going. So some soft skills that I would say are really important, especially kind of coming in, would be patience. That's one I could say that I had to kind of like learn and grow into. Patience with the process, patience with yourself, because, you know, you probably can visualize all the things that you can do before you're an expert at them. And I think that was something that I'm always kind of tug of warring with myself. Just like openness and kindness, I think, is a rare thing, but you can find it. And when you find those people and then you have sets where that's the reciprocation, that's the best. And I would even say that that kind of spreads into like just openness and sharing information. I think sometimes there are cultures out there per set or per project or whatever that kind of have this information is power, and people can use that to like their advantage to navigate a set. But I think when you're really coming with a certain level of openness and excitement about the core of the project and who you're working with, that can really like change the project.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever see newcomers making kind of a big or small mistake when they get started? Like, for example, I've seen interns come in and try to sell themselves as knowing everything already, trying to build up that they are very good at what they do. And it's like, yeah, you are good because you're here, but you don't, nobody knows everything. So do you see things like that? And how can people avoid that?
Ooh, yeah, I definitely see stuff like that. Well, I mean, I guess self-awareness is maybe how to avoid it a little bit. I think like being just very honest with people about what you bring to the table, and I think like another way to think about it is like I think people get so wrapped up on listing like resume traits, like I can operate this and I can do this thing and I know this software, whatever. But I think it's almost better to come, especially at the very beginning, to come in knowing your strengths, like as a human being. For example, like if you came in and said like, I'm futuristic and I'm contextual, and you could apply that and say like, I'm really good at seeing the big picture and seeing the vision of the future. And because I'm contextual, I can figure out all the details of how to get to that point. And then you say, you know, and I've had experience with this software and like these things, and this is how much I have. But then that really helps your team understand like where to put you on the team, so that you can not only like learn more of what you want to learn in those resume boxes, but they can place you in a place where you're motivated and you're like able to kind of help be part of the big picture, or you know, solve some details with, you know, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. One thing I had to learn when I was coming up was the best person to know you is you, and you have to explain what you are and where you fit in to really help people help you get to that point. And it's not like, oh, this is automatically the next step. Sometimes the next step you have to invent yourself. Going back to some more virtual production questions, there was a couple of technical type questions. So when you're working with chroma key, there's post-production, and the actors and everybody, they have like a guide to react to something. And how does that work in virtual production? How do they know what's happening in their virtual environment?
Yeah, well, you know, it definitely depends on the tech and the setup that you're using. I'll try to describe like two different versions of that, even though they're more. Okay, one would be like if you decided to use an in-cam setup, which is a pair of two stereo lenses that are connected to the underneath the bottom of your camera. It's a trackless system, and you don't necessarily need green screen, but you can use green screen. In that system, it's attached and working with a game engine, essentially. And there's another monitor that allows the director and the DP and everyone in Video Village to see in real time a live composite of that game engine world and the actor that you're shooting in a studio or outside interacting with the environment and or digital assets that you've put in real life. So that's one way. And like another example of a similar technique with different tech would be if you're using like a virtual production LED wall stage. If you have the ability to use camera tracking, meaning that the background on that screen is tracking along with the camera, some filmmakers choose to have a green screen box tracking behind talent or with the camera so that they can put a set extension in or decide what that area of the screen is going to be later. That camera system is also connected to a game engine where you have the option of having an in-camera composite that you can record while you're on set or choose not to record while you're on set. It's kind of up to you. But the benefit of having that real-time composite on set is you're bringing all of these departments together who are physically there making the shots so that the creatives can make final decisions while they're standing on set instead of trying to find them later in the process to make sure things are holding up. And you get that immediate, like maybe temp, like slap in camera composite. It could be final, but if it's temp, then you could send that directly to an editor so that they can begin really cutting your piece together. And it just takes the guesswork out of all these different department heads' jobs.
Yeah, that's so important. I really was surprised when I came to work on higher end stuff, how important, well, how much everyone held creative intent as the most important thing, which I thought was amazing. I wasn't sure what to expect, when I made it to Hollywood. And it's a big deal to maintain that from the lens all the way to wherever the final screen is. So that's super interesting. And it's interesting to see that there are many ways to pull off virtual production. And it's very cool to see it in real life too, especially with the LED walls. It works incredibly well. And it makes it so you can work in a very small environment. How has the pandemic impacted your work, if it has, or how do you think it may impact you in the future?
Well, it's interesting because as negative as the pandemic is, like one crazy like positive thing that came out of it for the virtual production community is sort of all studios and all eyes on this technology and how it can help get the industry back into production as soon as possible, essentially. And it's funny because I would say 9 or 10 months ago, the virtual production community is like, oh, we're on a steady path, we're gaining momentum, let's see it. We need to get studios on board with what our practices is so we can educate directors so that they're not intimidated by these workflows so that they can be paired with more content to keep it all going. But this is unprecedented. It's just kind of expedited everything, development, case studies. It's actually giving the community other ways of even approaching it, like adding safety discussions into it and all that sort of thing. So I feel like it's accelerated. Everybody in this community is just like, whoa, things are happening really fast. And there's a huge push right now to develop curriculum, get best practices kind of nailed down as of this summer, and then have the ongoing conversations and grow this market essentially. So it's the perfect time now to just observe, ideate, download the software, like learn as much as you can, watch stuff online, just absorb, and then as soon as the main group has gotten everything going again, there's just going to be more work for everybody.
Mm-hmm. And another question about learning, can you give some resources that people can go to, especially to learn lighting as it pertains to VFX, or in general, a good place to learn about any of this stuff? Like, for example, I've used FX PhD in the past, and also SMPTE webinars. I'm doing an imaging class this summer. Where do you recommend people go to learn that stuff?
This is going to sound funny, but like I think there are a lot of online platforms like YouTube and Facebook, and Googling case studies and videos. Like I just use the internet as a resource at this point. Like for game engines specifically, or like software specifically, I would go to those companies' websites. But ASC is really releasing a lot of content that are like talks with cinematographers. Masterclass has had some amazing lessons. Like I loved Annie Leibovitz, and I felt like I even learned a lot from that. But yeah, I mean, I would even like I refer to the web all the time. The VES is actually releasing and coming out with the 3rd edition of our VES visual effects like handbook in July. So that's another resource. It's actually pretty thorough and amazing if you're looking at, if you just want to have an understanding of techniques. It goes through everything, like how to light green screen. It's the manual that I use in addition to everything else like in my kit.
Amazing. Where do people find the VES handbook? Is it available like to order online, or?
Oh yeah, Amazon.
Oh, okay. That makes it easy. Somebody in the chat mentioned LinkedIn Learning Courses, which I think is also lynda.com. And I believe it's still true that if you have an if you're in LA, and I think this is true throughout the country, if you have a public library card, you can get access to that for free. Have you used Lynda and all those as well? I certainly have.
Yeah, I think I just learned about that through this COVID too. A friend of mine mentioned the library card. Oh, right on. I wrote down a list of other resources specifically for women and minorities that I think have been helpful for a wide variety of things, like building community with people, funding, grants, classes. One is the Inclusion Resource Map that Sundance published. It's on their website, and you can Google that. But they have, it's almost this amazing window into all these different communities that you could either identify with or would support or are offering grants. So it's extensive. And then Jen McGowan, who is a director in like I guess, this women's movement in the last 10 years out here in LA. Originally created Film Powered, which is now called glasselevate.com. If you're a woman in the entertainment industry, it's a great community to join because you essentially earn credits by teaching other women what you know. And so and you can take classes from other women, and it's also a database. It's a way to post jobs where you want to hire women. So if I'm ever in a hiring position, I always put my job posting there specifically, as well as all these other places, so that I can make sure that everyone has an opportunity to see these postings. And there are a lot of good postings that are put up there. So if you feel like you're in a Craigslist place right now and you want to get to that next level, Glass Elevate. And Women in Media is another group that you should check out. Tema Stagg, who started that nonprofit, she's an amazing production designer and art department lead, and she recognized in the same movement of women in the last 10 years that women below the line just don't have a general community or like an organization fighting for them to succeed and bring them resources. Like anything from training, special classes, like free tickets to things that are like $100 and you don't make enough money to like afford that stuff. Access. She's just all about access and promoting people who become members. And you could be a first AC, you could be a gaffer, you could be a DP, you could be in visual effects, you could be in art department. It kind of covers everything. But they're an amazing group. So check them out. And one thing that one conversation we've had is like, how do we stay visible? Like, how do we get hired as women and minorities? Like, we have to be visible and connecting and part of these databases, even though sometimes you don't want to be tagged with all these things. Like, the tags can help you right now. So that's one thing. And then I also support blackwomendirectors.co. That's an amazing resource. And seedandspark.com. Seed and Spark was also created by Emily Best in the last 10 years, who was part of this revolution and said, oh man, as a director, I'm trying to like raise money for this project, but I'm doing it. And I don't have any of the resources that I need to get this done. And so on her own journey, doing research about how to build communities around fundraising, has created this amazing Seed and Spark community. And it's probably most known out of this list, I'm sure. But anyway, it's a great.
That's a great list. I typed some of them out. I'll put it in the chat, and I'll see if I can send those all to the attendees later as well. Great resources. Another question people had about the pandemic is, are you following any safety guidelines like the code paper or using anything like Safe Space to help with health and safety as you get back to work on sets?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think right now we are in, I want to say like it's a research and tech viz stage where we are looking at all of that information and as a group kind of trying to map out these specific plans via case studies right now. I know that tomorrow's the 12th, so it sounds like that's kind of when the second stage is going to be lifted in Los Angeles. So I'd say right now case studies are kind of moving forward to test the water and come up with these plans and see if they work before everyone really goes full force and just starts to enter into that production world.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of discovery happening right now. A little scary, but got to get people back to work. And speaking of going back into a traditional crew environment, this is from the chat as well, are there major differences in communicating between the production crew that you would think of like G&E and all that, and the on-set VFX team? And are you all directly in contact a lot, particularly in virtual production heavy environments?
Yeah, it's interesting. Every set's run differently, and like a huge tentpole film is going to be different than like an indie film. I'd say maybe on a tentpole film, you're more likely to feel a little bit more segregated as a visual effects person on set, because that's just how people have decided to treat you, which is something that we're trying to move away from, which is why virtual production is so exciting. Virtual production like changes everything, because you know, there's really more guidance from the level of like a producer and director to have everyone organizing how they work together in the moment, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think on a traditional tentpole, like there was a way that production was doing things and they just tried to fit visual effects into it. But virtual production allows everybody to kind of work together and redefine what those relationships are and what the communication is.
Mm-hmm. It's exciting that that's being accelerated so that we can really revisit how we've been doing things for so long to make sure, you know, is it the right way? Is it the most efficient way? Another chat question that I think is interesting for people that are unfamiliar with this space: are you mostly finding that you have work where you are employed by a production company that pays you on contract, or are you more gig oriented? How does that usually work for you?
I kind of bounce back and forth, honestly. There are pros and cons to both. Working for a company generally means that you have benefits like health insurance eventually, if they offer you that. And you get to work with, you know, I mean, pre-COVID, you would work in an office with a lot of different people and have exposure to a ton of ideas, and maybe jump from project to project within a company. I've also worked at companies for like 2.5 years where it was one big project. And that was really interesting as well. The cinematography side, I'd say, for me is very gig to gig, project to project, story to story, director to director. Producing is something that, and coordinating, I would say, have been more like maybe project based, but longer term. Like when I was coordinating for Supergirl, and I had 10 months to do 24 episodes with an entire team of like 300 people. So just a bunch of different types of experiences.
Yeah, it's interesting to consider also when you're early in your career, which of these might mesh best with your personality. I'm not the kind of person that likes to have any unknowns, so the whole gig economy was not great for my mental health, which is why I ended up on the track I was on. But a lot of people love the flexibility, so that's just another dimension of figuring out your career.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time, so I'm just going to ask 2 final questions. One being, what aspect of your work are you most proud of right now?
Ooh.
Always a tough question.
It is a tough question. I'm really excited about where my head has been creatively, because I finally feel like, I think throughout your career you kind of like reach different levels of like struggle and plateau where you're like, I'm trying to put all this information together. Oh my gosh, I've got it. I have like ideas. So I feel really positive about like the place I am with like the creativity and the ideas, and like honing in on what tools I can use. And then on the flip side, I'm excited about like the growth that I've seen in myself in management and leadership.
Yeah, I feel like management, leadership are skills that we don't learn necessarily directly in school or anything. And that is really what sets people apart when they climb up the ladder, because nobody likes to work for somebody that's bad at people. And finally, what is one piece of advice you can give to newcomers that they can apply today?
If you're like a total newcomer, I'd say observe and absorb everything and just be curious and open-minded to kind of little pieces of everything, and give yourself the time to sit with a lot of it, and don't put pressure on yourself to have figured out your niche or like where you fit. Just kind of have this openness to let yourself gravitate to things that you're passionate about and not feel like you're even locked into it. Like just this whole, like a molecule. It's like, I'm interested in this. Oh, and it's taking me over here now. Just the freedom to be able to give yourself like a little bit of room in your career for that, especially at the beginning, because it's kind of like this time that you don't even realize is like, you know, you have a lot of time that you probably won't get back, because the more passionate and focused you get about something, like the more narrow like your career ends up getting. So just enjoy the broadness and the bigness of it.
Great advice. I wish I had gotten much earlier. Well, thank you so much, Kathryn. We're at the end of our hour. So I feel like everyone should have learned so much from your journey and from your knowledge. There's so much to virtual production and VFX that is changing, and it's really exciting to hear from somebody on the forefront of that. Just a couple of quick announcements before I wrap up. Just always remember, if you're on this call, no matter where you are in your career, you have something to teach somebody. And if you don't see people in this industry that look like you, it isn't because you aren't supposed to be here. You matter, and there's a lot of people like Kathryn out there working on changing the state of things to remove these systemic barriers. A couple of quick notes. Just so you know, there's a 50% discount on virtual courses with code SMPTE50. Like I said, I'm doing a really great course this summer on imaging with Rochester Institute of Technology. Very excited about that. A really good opportunity to learn. You can get free access to articles right now in the Motion Imaging Journal and access to technology webcasts that you don't necessarily get otherwise. It's what SMPTE trying to do to help the impact of the pandemic. And there are also these topic-specific microsites on things like AI and blockchain. And like I said earlier, students can join free and renew for $15. Joining SMPTE gets you some really great stuff. You get to, notifications about events like this. And then when we can actually see each other in person, you can maybe come to a section meeting and meet everybody. And thank you to SMPTE Hollywood for being the host for this. I'll be back next Thursday at noon for the next in our series, same time. This time I'll be talking to Matt Christensen, who's a software quality engineer for Adobe Premiere Pro. And you can find all the signups on our SMPTE Hollywood Facebook page. I made a little tiny URL there that goes straight to Matt's event if you want to use that. So thanks again, Kathryn, and thank you all for joining. Hopefully I'll see you all next week.